So it's kind of the yin and the yang. It's prepping our media people to make sure that they're on message, but then also making sure that if there is a major event that happens, we're going to be ready. I mean, look at the NCAA this past week with the female athlete that took the picture of the weight room for the women and then took a picture of the weight room for the men and put that out there on social media. I mean, that was a major, major bombshell. And some people were a bit critical, and I'm not saying I am, of the NCAA, but just saying, you know what, you really needed to have the president, CEO out there with messaging much faster than they did. They waited a few days. They had somebody further down the executive ladder that was addressing the issue. So, and again, I'm not knocking them. I don't know all the details, but it's like something as simple as someone taking a picture, and now all of a sudden it's national headline news. You have to be prepared for those events.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Over a Pint, where we talk about the world of marketing and everything else in between above that. I am joined by Pat McGovern, Business Development Director at Acedia, a digital firm here in Milwaukee. Pat.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm still anyway, being a McGovern, still in the St. Patty's Day thing, so I'm knocking back another Guinness. I'm going to pop this open right now.
Cheers.
Nicely done. Cheers.
Cheers.
Joined by also Brian Meehan, President of Celtic. Brian, hello.
Gentlemen, it's weird. I'm going to be the star of the show today. I'm used to being on your side of the screen, but I guess you're going to pepper me with PR questions today, huh?
We are going to pepper you with some PR questions, and I'd be remiss if I did not introduce myself. My name is Kurt Lingle. I am Brian's business partner at Celtic. We are a full-service advertising agency located in Milwaukee. There's my plug.
Nice.
Cool. So,
hey, Kurt, by the way, I got to plug Three Sheeps.
Yeah, please do.
Out of Sheboygan. You turned me onto this one this week, actually. Great little IPA, low alcohol content called Fresh Coast. So thanks for tuning into that.
Hey, Three Sheeps, if you're listening, we need a sponsor for the show, so please feel free to reach out and connect with us.
Three Sheeps is a great brewery. I, too, am drinking their Nitro Stout. It is delicious. I love what Three Sheeps is doing. I've been a big fan of them for quite some time. So, Pat, I will echo your comments. We would love to hear from Three Sheeps down the road and maybe have them as a guest on a future podcast. So, but let's get right to it. We are here to talk about public relations. And Brian, that is your chosen career. That's your area of expertise.
Yeah.
And I thought this would be a good opportunity. We could talk about public relations and maybe some of the myths, misconceptions, some of the things that, maybe clients don't realize or don't fully understand when they come to work with someone like us. So I guess I'm just going to start with the first question. Public relations is one of the services we offer. I mean, Brian, you've been doing this for a long time. And when a client comes to, say, a Celtic, what are some of the things that maybe a client doesn't fully understand about public relations?
Yeah.
Or maybe they think about public relations, it's this when it's really that, or it's, what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Well, when I was, I went to Marquette University and I majored in advertising and public relations. And I remember when I told my dad I was going into PR, and I think his reaction was, "What the hell is that?" Had no clue what it is. And I even run into that today when I talk to students and even people that are in the marketing world. They don't really know what it is. And I guess the easiest way for me to define it is it's the process of how an organization creates and distributes information to the public. I like to always strip it down to that level. It's the way they create and distribute information to the public. And you may say, well, who's the public? Is that the media? Well, yes, of course it is. But organizations have a variety of stakeholders, a variety of public that they need to communicate with. I mean, look at like a university like Marquette. You have students, you have prospective students, you have parents of prospective students, you have teachers, you have, board of directors, you have city and government officials. These are all people that you need to communicate with. And when you're a PR practitioner, you have to maintain those levels of communication. So that's basically the way that I explain it to most people, is how an organization communicates with the public and its various stakeholders. In terms of Celtic, a big part of what we do is media relations. So developing earned media for clients. So telling their stories, basically, finding out what makes them unique and interesting, and then sharing that story with the media so that they ultimately will do a story on the client. That's a big part of what we do. But another big part of it is also creating content. We now live in the world of social media and bloggers and podcasters and influencers. You don't have to rely just on the media. When I first started in PR, it was all distributing our information through a media partner. Now it's just like, I can go to an online influencer. I can go to a podcaster. I can use my social media channels to get my story out to the various publics that we communicate with. So really it's media relations, and then it's content. Those are the two big pieces of the puzzle.
Okay. Brian, if I could, one thing, if I could follow up with that, the one thing I've learned by working with you and some of our other PR practitioners here at Celtic, the thing we talk a lot about here at Celtic is, when it comes to PR, think beyond the press release. And that's something, obviously you were touching on in terms of, content is a big part of what we do, but maybe talk a little bit more about that, because I think, you're right. It's evolved in terms of the different deliverables and areas that we provide clients,
Yeah. Well, sometimes when we start meeting with a prospective client, a lot of times they'll say, well, you guys just write press releases and send them out, right? And then you're done. And the reality is it's not that way at all anymore. Do we still write press releases and distribute them to media contacts? Absolutely. There's no doubt. But really, where the value of where we come in is we study the media. So we'll actually develop media databases for our clients that are, these are media outlets that cover your industry, cover your types of products and services. And then we study those. So we look at, who are the reporters? Who are the editors? What types of topics are they going to be covering throughout the year? Who's the person that I need to reach out to and pitch? So yes, we may send a press release, but we're also following up with a phone call. We're also inviting media out to, hey, let's grab a cup of coffee so I can learn more about your coverage areas and how my clients may fit into some upcoming coverage. And then beyond that, like you said, it's just ongoing content. Our PR team is very involved in social media and is very involved in working with influencers to make sure that we're getting our clients' information out to them and that they're using our products. They're taking advantage of the services that we have to offer, and they're helping to promote our clients beyond just, again, writing a simple press release. The reality is the media is inundated. I mean, I could only imagine if you took an average media person, hundreds of probably emails that they're getting every day with static, boring press releases. So we really try to go beyond the release and present stories to the media that they're looking for and they want and is of interest to their viewers and readers.
So, Brian, one of the things that I'd love to get your feedback on is this: how do you tell the client they've got an ugly baby? And by that, I mean, they get really worked up about maybe an enhancement with a product. Could even be a somewhat new product. It might be, a new service or something. And the client gets totally excited about it because that's their world. That's what he or she has been working on for the past 8 months. And now let's get this out there. This is going to be the biggest thing since Windows 95.
Yeah.
And they come to you and you go, what's the hook?
That's a great question. And I think honesty is always the best policy. And sometimes, what the answer is? It's not a PR play. This might be something that's more for marketing, advertising, social media, but the media, they're just not going to be interested. And we have to be honest with our clients, because we're not going to go out and pitch something and try to promote something that the media isn't going to look for. It's a waste of your time. Maybe that's best served through an email out to your customers. So first of all, it's being real. But the other thing is I'll push back. Because a lot of times people say, well, we're going to get a press release out, or we're going to pitch the media, and we're going to talk about features and benefits of the product. It's a yawner. In today's world, and I know it's a little bit an overplayed term, but it's about storytelling. So instead of talking about features and benefits, tell me about how this product is going to change the industry, change the state, change the world. Why would people want this? And let's create stories around it. So instead of it being about, hey, we introduced product X, Y, and Z, why don't we approach the media and say, you know what, it's been really interesting. There's been people in the healthcare industry that have been using this new product, and they're discovering that there's health benefits for people that have heart conditions. And we did a study, and we learned that X% of the people that use this service or product had a health benefit. That's what the media is looking for, is how does your product, how does your service make a difference and change things versus just here's another product with a bunch of features and benefits and go to our website to learn more. So a lot of times what we're really pushing back on clients is, that's great, I love the product, it seems really cool, but who cares? How is this going to benefit somebody? And let's tell those stories. Let's tell a story of the product designer, the person behind the product who developed it. Why did they develop it? What need does it serve? What problem does it solve? So really pushing clients to dig deeper than just the benefits of a product.
So Brian, here's, in the spirit of being honest, I'm going to ask you another question.
Yeah.
Not that this has ever happened, but so being honest with the client. So let's talk about, do you ever find, or in your experience, have clients ever come to you, to the agency, and has the expectation been that, I want to do public relations and I expect to move the world with this public relations initiative, and maybe they're doing PR for the wrong reasons, or they're not really understanding its role that goes along with paid advertising. And what I'm trying to get to is, a lot of times I find they rely on the public relations exclusively because they feel, I want to avoid paid media, which can be very, very expensive. Not to say that there's not an investment in PR, but I mean, the two really need to work together. It's like lightning and thunder.
Yeah, I always hate when it's just, siloing PR. There needs to be the social media component. There needs to be the advertising component. But a lot of people do come to us for PR because they see the value. They're like, okay, for you to develop press materials, distribute it to the media, and, do some follow-up work, you're going to charge us X amount of dollars. Well, if I now get you in the Wall Street Journal, or if I get you into Outside Magazine, or I get you on Fox and Friends morning show, the value of that is going to exceed the investment tenfold, 20-fold. And a lot of clients can't get access to major media outlets with the budgets that they have. It's just one of those things where they'd love to run media, but they can't afford it. So PR is a way to get them into those channels with earned media versus paid media. But you're right, you have to also just set expectations.
Sure.
If you give me $2,000 a month, don't expect to be on the cover of USA Today and, CBS Evening News within a week. It's going to take time. And that's really what, PR is, a lot of ways is like sales. And I know people don't like to hear that, but really what it is, it's a long tail type of game where, you outreach to the media, you introduce yourself, you share some story ideas, you look at their editorial calendar and say, hey, I see that you're doing a story about, B2B automation. I have a client I think that could meet that way. Then you meet them at a trade show. I invite them to the booth and we have an interaction at the trade show. And maybe after 3 or 4 touch points, finally that member of the media goes, you know what, I want to interview someone for your company. I think you guys are thought leaders, or you've got interesting products.
Yeah.
So it takes
Yeah.
time and repetition.
Brian, do you guys ever have, I'm guessing most of the clients come to you and say, we've got a need for PR. Here's our product. Here's our story. Help make it happen. How often and to what degree are you brought in before the product is totally baked? You know what I mean?
Yes, that's a really good question.
I mean, because it seems like with your understanding of influencers, with your understanding of the media, if you can make some subtle tweaks or potentially bigger tweaks before the product can kind of like pulled out of the oven, that you could get a ton more exposure, right?
The answer is both. The answer is sometimes people come to us and say the product is developed, here's a sell sheet. I'll talk to you for a half hour on the phone to give you some details. Now go to work.
Right.
And that's okay. I mean, it's not the most ideal, but we understand that it's like, you know what, we're smart. We can figure this out. We can run from there. I think where the real value comes in, and you nailed it, is upfront. And there's opportunities where, for instance, a lot of times we're invited to sales meetings. So we're there when they're meeting with their sales teams from around the country, around the globe, and they're talking about, this is a product we're going to be launching in 6 months. Yep. And now we're starting to learn about it up front, where we can say, that's interesting. What if you were to tweak something, or I think the media would like it more if it was a different widget or color, whatever that may be. The other thing is a lot of times pre-COVID, we'd go to trade shows because we knew the media would be there, and we would invite the media into the booth and say, you know what, here's a product that's in development. Obviously this is confidential, but what are your thoughts? I mean, you know the industry better than anybody.
Cool. Right.
You guys are, you know what works and doesn't work and what's trending and what isn't. What do you think about it? And we'll get some raw feedback and share that with product development teams. And there have been times where products have been tweaked to make it a little bit more interesting to trade in consumer media.
Nice.
Guys, one of the things that I've learned here at Celtic is that there can be a ton of creativity that goes into public relations. And I get back to, think beyond the release. And again, that's been something that's just been entrenched in my brain. But, I've seen here at our own agency, as well as other initiatives, where a tremendous amount of creativity would go into a PR campaign. And within a PR campaign, there might be digital, there might be some traditional, but PR is what's driving it. Brian, can you maybe talk about or share an example of maybe one of the more, creative or interesting PR initiatives that you've been a part of, where it's like, you were like, wow, this was really cool how this came together. There were a lot of legs.
Yeah.
For example.
Well, one thing I'd probably talk about is an outdoor brand that we worked with several years ago. I won't get into the brand specifically, but what was interesting is they were launching a new line of products under their corporate umbrella. And, when we first met, it's like, well, we could reach out to the media and send some product samples and have them test it and get stories that way, which we ultimately did. But we said let's do something a little bit more creative. And what we did was a cross-country road trip. Again, this was an outdoor product. So what we did is we hopped in a branded vehicle with a tow behind, and we literally traveled across the country, stopping at major I lack of better words, tourist stops, destinations, venues. We went to the Denver Zoo, we went to the Arch in St. Louis, we hit all these different places, and we brought our mascot and we brought product samples, and we literally took it to the street. So people that were outdoors with their kids, we would give them product samples so that they could try and test. The media kind of picked up on it, and they followed us along at certain stops, and it turned into stories. And then we utilized, talking about bringing in other areas, but we use social media to cover the tour. So videos, photos, contests, giveaways. And it was really cool because it was fun. It was a really fun event, but it really involved, traditional media relations, social media, events, promotions, giveaways, and it had all of these different angles to it. So it was more than just a story on a website. It really became much larger than that. So I would say that was probably one of the more interesting things that I've been a part of in recent memory.
I love it. I love all of those. I love stories like that. I love all those components. I love using PR like that with promotions. I think that is, that's a bigger meta trend that's going on. I see that continuing. But let me ask you this, Brian, so you've got that, and it's cool when it's like a cool product. Like if you're doing an outdoor thing, you can make it a canoe or, whatever, right? That's, you've got it. But let's say I'm in the B2B space, right? Yeah. And my piece of equipment is, I can't do that. It's like, it's this huge thing, right? This piece of machinery. Like, can I use some of the same tactics and tools and tricks that you just talked about for this?
Absolutely. And a lot of times you hear that it's like, well, that's a sexy consumer product. Of course they'll be interested. Listen, I've done a ton of B2B and continue to do a ton of B2B PR. And what the reality is it may not be sexy, but you know what? It's an engine that let's just say has greater fuel economy so it doesn't pollute as much, has higher power to it so as it's going through a commercial cut of long grass, it can make its way through it. It's more fuel efficient so it saves money. That matters in B2B. That matters to a reporter where it's like, yeah, it may not be super sexy, but at the end of the day, it brings some real innovation to the commercial space that I write about. So I want to know about those things. They still want information. They want facts. They want to talk to the engineers. They want to see the product in action. And just because it's B2B doesn't mean you can have any less success. Quite frankly, sometimes we have even more success in the B2B world because they're looking for content too. So I really don't see a delineation between the two. You're using a lot of the similar tools. It's just one's a little bit more B2B speak and technical oriented, and one is a little bit more fun, playful, consumer driven.
If I could, I'm gonna shift a little bit here. I'm gonna pick Brian's brain on something else. So obviously now more than ever, I mean, it's how what companies say, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. What companies end up saying to the public matters. Every word matters. Every time someone is being interviewed, it matters. Choose your words carefully. And I know, from a PR perspective, there's also this other area where we work with clients, crisis management and being a public spokesperson for a client. Brian, if you could talk a little bit about the importance of that role that the PR practitioner plays, yeah, and the pitfalls that you see and the things that you do and we do as a company to advise clients to do things maybe more smarter, if I will.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, usually where we start off, to be quite frank, when we get engaged with a new client, is we get into message development. And we'll sit down with their key spokespeople and say, listen, I know there's a lot of things that you want to talk about. And sometimes you're going into interviews or you're going into meetings with people and you're just going to shoot from the hip. It's like, that's not going to work. We really need to drill down and find out what are those things about your organization that make you make you unique, make you special. It talks about what you stand for. So we'll actually sit down and we'll do media training where we'll do mock interviews and critique. We'll do message development. So that way, again, if you have a CEO of a company that gets invited to a coffee business breakfast or is going to be speaking to employees or is going to be speaking with the media, they are trained, they are prepared, and they always know that these are kind of messages that I can fall back on. We never want our clients to be caught off guard. It's not like, hey, the Wall Street Journal wants to talk to you. Here's their number. Call them back. I mean, the reality is when we have interviews or big opportunities, we're sitting down over the phone and we're going through messaging. We're doing mock interviews. We're critiquing. So it's all about being prepared. I think is huge. But the other component of that we work with clients is what happens when crisis strikes. And, for some corporations, a crisis may be, we're in the airline industry and one of our planes just went down. A horrific event that you have to be prepared for. But it can also be smaller things where an employee says something on social media that doesn't reflect who we are. You can't just ignore the media. Our big thing is we will always be proactive in good times and in bad times, but we're going to be prepared for trouble areas. And there's times with clients that we've worked with where we'll try to predict events that could potentially happen. Where we'll brainstorm and be like, what happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? And then we will sit down and actually start to develop preliminary messaging so that in the event that something happens, we're not just sitting here going, who's doing what? The reality is we know that John is going to be the head. We're going to bring in our crisis team, which is made up of marketing, customer service, the C-suite, product development. We're going to have a team and we're going to crack into some of the messaging that we've developed and come up with a statement that is particular to that event, because we want to get out there quickly, but we also want to get out there with the right messaging. Sometimes you rush to get out and you're not ready. We want to get out quick so that we can let people know that this is serious and that we're on top of it. but we're also going to feel comfortable knowing what we're going to say to people when we get out there. So it's kind of the yin and the yang. It's prepping our media people to make sure that they're on message, but then also making sure that if there is a major event that happens, we're going to be ready. I mean, look at the NCAA this past week with the female athlete that took the picture of the weight room for the women and then took a picture of the weight room for the men and put that out there on social media. I mean, that was a major, major bombshell. And some people were a bit critical, and I'm not saying I am, of the NCAA, but just saying, you know what, you really needed to have the president, CEO out there with messaging much faster than they did. They waited a few days. They had somebody further down the executive ladder that was addressing the issue. So, and again, I'm not knocking them. I don't know all the details, but it's like something as simple as someone taking a picture, and now all of a sudden it's national headline news. You have to be prepared for those events.
Yeah. Hey, guys, could I take the last question? In one of the trends that I see, I see it, I read a lot about it, is influencers, and you mentioned that, right? Brian, I'd love to get your take and maybe your tips for people listening on, like, what's the best way to work? What are some of the, tips and do's and don'ts for working with influencers? Because I just see that as time goes on, that this is not a fad. It's not something that's going to be going away. It's something that's here, and it's going to just continue to grow, right? So
you're absolutely right. And what's so exciting about it is, again, we used to be so dependent upon the media, and we still are to deliver messages, but now you can find people that have niche audiences that can deliver your message. So some of the things when we deal with clients, I'm like, number one, we're not going for Paris Hilton, 10 million, views a day. It's like, let's not go for the masses. There's a lot of niche players that are out there that are micro influencers that maybe, like, just say we're in Wisconsin, and let's say we work with a travel tourism brand where it's a mom that runs a blog and it's all about fun things to do with your family in the summer in Wisconsin. Well, we certainly want to be a part of developing a relationship with someone like that. And she may only have, or he may only have 10,000 people, but boy, they're dedicated. And so it's not always a numbers play. When it first started, it was, let's go find the biggest person on Twitter and partner with them. So I would say look for micro influencers. Another big one, though, is authenticity. Look for someone who believes in your product. There's nothing more phony than when it's someone who's like, I'll promote anything for $1. You know what I mean? It's got to be somebody who's tried the product, tested the service, believes in it, and has some stake in it. I think is really important when looking at stakeholders. And one thing I'll just kind of add is, and I'll leave it with our conversation with this, that I think PR is more important now than ever because people want to work with brands that stand for something and believe in something. In the old days when I first started, it was just, we pump out products. We make products. That's what we do. We're a business. It's not so much that case anymore. People are like, that's great that you make products, but I also want to know what you're doing to be socially responsible. I also want to know what you're doing to focus on justice and equality. I want to know what you're doing to preserve the environment. People care about that stuff. And that's not always going to be translated through an ad or a direct marketing piece. Sometimes it's going to be through the media, but it's also going to be influencers that are out there saying, hey, I use this product. And, I love that, they believe in these types of things because I believe in them too. So you really have to look at storytelling and look at standing for something and being authentic. I think that's going to be more critical than ever before.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
And what I'll do, guys, is, I've got some additional ideas that I like to share. Maybe what I'll do is I'll create a blog post and we'll link it to this podcast. So if people want to kind of know what my kind of top 6 things are to look for in the coming year, they can hit our blog up.
Yeah,
and we'll have
great.
some content up there.
That's great. This was an awesome interview. Awesome interview, guys. Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for sharing the PR. I totally agree with you. I think this is going to be a bigger component. Keep building as a channel going forward.
Absolutely.
And it strikes me as there are companies that get it but more often than not, there's so many companies that don't get it, right? Because they
Absolutely.
think PR is almost like advertising. Like,
Yep.
hey, when you send this media out, like, so who all from the media is going to be there? It's like, well, maybe no one,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
you never
Yeah.
know. You never
Yeah.
know with this stuff. It's not a paid type of thing, and I think people have a hard time wrapping their head around it. But the value is so big. You did a great job. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Thanks for
Brian,
having me, fellas. Cheers.
what I like that you said too is that it's part of the brand story. I think that's the other thing I would say. It's, you think of ads as one thing, but PR, it's all encompassing, and
Absolutely.
it has to be authentic. So it's good. And I would say if anyone wants to learn more, like you said, Brian, please put the blog up. Contact Brian. Contact Celtic. We'd love to help you. But this was a great episode. And till next time, thank you very much. Cheers,
everybody. Thank
Gentlemen.
you.
Cheers.
Cheers.